trembled slightly as she began. Ladies and gentlemen, today the Nobel Peace Prize recognizes the universal struggle for justice, sovereignty, and dignity. The committee has deliberated at length, and we have reached our decision. She broke the seal, and the room leaned forward collectively. Across continents, breaths were held. The Nobel Peace Prize is awarded to... She paused, glancing at the paper, then the audience, then back again. Finally, her lips parted. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. The hall erupted, not with polite applause but with gasps, shouts, and stunned silence. Pens were dropped, notebooks forgotten, and some delegates visibly reeled from the announcement. A French diplomat stormed out, muttering under his breath, while an American envoy whispered, "This is a disaster." But in Africa, the reaction was the opposite. Pure, unbridled joy. In Ouagadougou, fireworks tore open the night sky as crowds surged through the streets, chanting, crying, hugging strangers in spontaneous celebration. Women ululated, their voices carrying through radios across the nation. Drums pounded, horns blared, and for the first time in living memory, an African leader was not just a footnote in a foreigner's history. He was the headline. In Bamako, citizens climbed lampposts waving flags. In Johannesburg, students paraded through campuses shouting, "Justice is peace." Across social media, a digital festival erupted. Hashtags, memes, songs, and even dance challenges celebrated the captain who had defied the world. Meanwhile, Paris was silent. Washington simmered with anger. London shook its head in disbelief. Yet no editorial, press release, or official frown could drown out the roar of celebration sweeping across the global south. That night, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a sea of people in Ouagadougou. He wore no suit, no crown, just simple fatigues and a beret. The Nobel medal gleamed in his hand, but he held it loosely, as if it were no heavier than a coin. "My people," he began, his voice steady and clear. "This medal is not mine, it is yours. They gave it to me, but I return it to you. Because peace is not written on metal. Peace is written in full stomachs, in safe homes, in dignity that cannot be stolen. That is the only peace worth fighting for." The crowd thundered in response, their cheers echoing across the streets and through the hearts of millions. Far away in the quiet chambers of Oslo, the Nobel Committee realized something unprecedented. For the first time, their prize had not crowned a man. It had crowned a movement. It had recognized a vision, a defiance, and a truth that could no longer be ignored. When the dust settled and the fireworks faded, the world was left with a question that would not go away. Did Ibrahim Traoré win the Nobel Prize, or did the Nobel Prize itself win Ibrahim Traoré? Across Africa, his triumph was remembered not as the success of one man, but as the victory of an entire continent. Farmers who had long felt invisible now spoke openly of dignity restored. Youth who had once doubted that the world would ever take Africa seriously began to walk taller, their heads held high. Elders who had lived through decades of colonialism, exploitation, and silenced voices whispered with pride, "At last, they heard us." Universities across the continent hosted debates and lectures on what it meant for Africa to define peace on its own terms, while poets wrote verses immortalizing the captain who turned the medal into a mirror. Musicians blended traditional drum rhythms with modern beats, crafting songs that celebrated not Oslo but Ouagadougou. And for once, the stage of the Nobel Prize had bowed before Africa, not the other way around. In the West, the aftermath was complicated and uneasy. France, long accustomed to scripting the narrative of its former colonies, tiptoed between denial and outrage. Newspapers ran headlines like "Nobel Prize hijacked by populism" and "Peace in Camo, Oslo's bold gamble," attempting to frame the award as aberrant, symbolic, and ultimately powerless. But behind closed doors, diplomats understood that symbols carried tremendous weight, and the ripples of Traoré's victory could not be contained by rhetoric alone. In Washington, debates flared across television panels and talk shows. One commentator sneered, "The Nobel has lost credibility." Another replied with equal venom, "Or maybe it just found it." For the first time in decades, the West no longer dictated the definition of peace unchallenged. Across capitals accustomed to comfortable narratives and controlled imagery, there was now a profound, uncomfortable realization. The rules had changed. Inside Oslo, the Nobel Committee itself felt the full force of that transformation. By awarding Traoré, they hadn't merely honored a man, they had cracked open their own tradition, forcing it to confront an uncomfortable truth. Peace, they realized, was no longer a polished speech in a gilded conference hall or the carefully rehearsed smile of a diplomat. It was messy, dangerous, radical. It was a farmer refusing to starve, a soldier refusing to kneel, a young leader refusing to allow his people to be written out of history. For the first time in years, the Nobel Prize didn't feel like a crown, it felt like a challenge, a question posed to the world itself. Can you follow or will you resist? And what of the captain himself? In Burkina Faso, Traoré returned to his daily duties as though nothing had changed. He visited villages, oversaw food programs, spoke to soldiers, and pushed for unity, maintaining the relentless rhythm of governance that had defined his rise. When asked about the medal, he often shrugged, sometimes leaving it locked away, other times holding it loosely during speeches, not as a treasure but as a reminder. In a rare quiet interview, he was asked, "What does the Nobel Prize mean to you?" He paused, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "It means the world finally listened. But only for a moment. After this, they may forget again. That is why the true work continues. The prize is not the end, it is just a reminder. Africa must write its own peace, every day with or without medals." And so the Nobel Peace Prize of that year came to be remembered differently depending on where one stood. In Europe, it was controversial. In America, a mistake. But across Africa and the global south, it was seen as a turning point. It was the year when a young soldier in dusty fatigue stood taller than the polished suits of the world. The year when peace was no longer defined in Oslo, Paris, or Washington, but in Ouagadougou. And in the annals of history, it was written not as the year Ibrahim Traoré won the Nobel Prize, but as the year the Nobel Prize was forced to meet Ibrahim Traoré.